If the Florida State Seminoles and Clemson Tigers find a way out of the ACC, this 2027 cheat code won't be the reason why.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On this episode, we will talk to the Cal fan who said he's not worried about anyone else in the ACC. I cannot wait to talk to Lawrence Ross about why the Cal Golden Bears are going to shock the world in their debut season in the ACC this year. I do want to talk about the coaches poll that has come out, and if the ACC should feel a little bit snubbed. It's a preseason poll, but I don't know. Not a whole lot of respect there, right? Kenton Gibbs, of course, from Locked On Wolfpack. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. Now, Kenton, if and when Florida State and Clemson are able to get out of the ACC, it looks like this 2027 TV deal loophole may not be the loophole that some thought after all.
Wow, what a shocker. Donno, what a shock. I am perplexed by this, Donno. I am perplexed because the 2027 loophole not being all it's cracked up to be is who could have predicted this? Who could have seen this coming? You know, it must be an ability of clairvoyance or something for somebody to know, hey, the reality is that this contract, you know, if you're looking at it from a somewhat objective standpoint, you see that it lasts a little bit longer than that 2027 date, which is why the price tag is so high, which, granted, you can argue that the price tag is a little bit arbitrary. I'm not mad at that argument. I get that. But the idea behind it is there's all these years in addition to. And on top of that, this whole 2036 thing is kind of – we can all say ESPN has the option to not renew, but again, it's like telling somebody, hey, do you want this job giving candy to small babies? You don't have to worry about if they throw up or whatever they do afterwards. That's your whole job. Entice children with candy. Are you sure you want it? Everybody would say, if you want to pay me millions to do it, for sure. That's what ESPN has. They're not going to go away from that. So, you know, I'm not very surprised to hear that 2027 loophole per se doesn't hold water in terms of contract renewal.
So here's some clarity on the situation provided by Doug Rohan of Rohan Law. He's an attorney who is not directly involved in this case. He's a Florida State fan who covers the extremely closely, and he sends the following out on his X account. Rohan puts out your post. He's commenting on a post from Genetics56, who tweets 25 hours a day about conference realignment and the big two. He says, your post was wonderful and lovely and perfect right until the wheels fell off at the end. He said, you successfully showed that the multimedia agreement with ESPN does not have any language regarding the grant of rights and therefore exists independently of the grant of rights. The converse is similarly true, he says. The grant of rights between the schools and the conference have nothing to do with the multimedia agreement. I disagree that any extension, as contemplated in the language of the originally approved 2016 agreement, requires a new grant of rights. The 2016 grant of rights ran through 2036. So as long as there is an ESPN deal that runs through 2036, and absent FSU being successful on their other claims, they are bound to the ACC through 2036. There is no need for a new grant of rights. So what he's responding to there, Kenton, is this idea that's gotten very popular, probably among a lot of people who aren't lawyers, who have been looking at the language and saying, well, hey, if they extend that ESPN deal from 2027, that constitutes as a new agreement, or if they alter that deal in any way, which is their right, they have a look-in provision, that a different TV deal is going to require a brand new grant of rights, which every ACC school would have to sign. And, Florida State and Clemson can just conveniently not sign that new grant of rights. and they can just waltz out the door in 2027. So again, as Rohan points out at the end of his post, like this doesn't necessarily mean Florida State and Clemson are stuck in the ACC until 2036. It just means if they're going to get out, they're not going to get out based on this particular idea that a new grant of rights is required in 2027, and they just don't have to sign it. That's not how they get out, Kenton.
Yeah, and it's basically the very simple principle of, hey, the two are very closely related. They're not one and the same. That's the whole argument here, that the TV deal and the grant of rights, they're very close. They're not one for one in that, hey, if this happens, then this happens automatically. It doesn't work in that way. So again, it's not really the surprise. It's not really a surprise to most of us who look at this and we're like, I mean, this is not really any groundbreaking news here, because at the end of the day, not only is the extension almost a virtual lock to happen, but even beyond that, even if you weren't looking at that, you're still looking at a situation where, again, the grant of rights is a separate document from the TV deals. They just run together in ways, but they're not overlapping in that one directly means that the other exists or vice versa.
Yeah, and if it was just so easy that, hey, in 2027 they need a new grant of rights and Florida State and Clemson just leave, then why are they hiring these lawyers and paying them so much money? Like, why are they even bothering to fight if in 3 years from now they're just out for free? That obviously it's not that they're going to have to, as Rohan says, they're going to have to win on one of their other claims here, which they very well might, right? I mean, again, you and I both agree that at some point Florida State and Clemson will see who's got the better lawyers. If one or the other finds a way out, that might be the way out for both. But it's not just going to be, hey, we tear up the grant of rights in 2027, we all sign a new one.
Yeah, it was very informative, and that it's not looking good when Rohan is appearing to have a pro ACC stance, or a stance that appears to be like, hey, this isn't going to be as easy for FSU as one would imagine, because, again, when we look at these things, we consider the source, and Rohan Law has been very much so on the side of, well, this could be good for Florida State because, well, this thing is good for Florida State because, and so you're looking at this moment and saying to yourself, hey, if Rohan can't spin this thing, yeah, that's tough. That's a real tough one.
Well, can we spin the preseason coaches poll, which was just revealed? Is the ACC representation, does this match truth? We'll talk about that and so much more when we come back. You know what you want to do, my friends? We're only getting started. You want to keep it locked on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Hey, guys, I'm only getting started with Game Time. This is the only ticket app that Kenton's on the Game Time app right now, looking up tickets for the next game, the next concert, the next comedy show. The prices actually go down the closer you get to the event, which is amazing. I'm still, looking to lock in my tickets for the Miami Hurricanes, the Florida Gators, and Gainesville to open up the upcoming season. Guys, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. You could save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. For your second listen, make sure you check out Kenton on Locked On Wolfpack. Check me out on Locked On Canes. Bring you all the North Carolina State and Miami information you can possibly get. By the way, later in this episode, we will be getting the info on Cal. Newcomers into the ACC. Are they ready to shock the conference with all those travel miles? First year in the conference, we're going to get into that. But Kenton, speaking on the ACC, the coaches poll is out, and the first ACC team you see is Florida State at number 10. Then you've got Clemson at 14, Miami at 19, and NC State at 22. So you look at that top 12, and obviously the coaches poll is not necessarily a representation of what the college football playoff top 12 is going to look like, because you're going to have at least one team outside the group of, or the Power Four in the group of five, who's going to get into the playoff based on the conference winners clause and all that. But Georgia at number 1 in the SEC, Ohio State and Oregon 2 and 3 in the Big Ten, Texas at number 4, Alabama at 5, Ole Miss at 6, SEC, Notre Dame Independent at number 7, Michigan, if they're still cheating, they're at number 8, Penn State number 9. Then you got Florida State at number 10, Mizzou, SEC at 11, LSU, SEC at number 12. So this whole Power 2 thing, I mean, Kenton, outside of an independent in Notre Dame and Florida State, you don't have anyone from the Big 12 in there. This thing is dominated by the SEC and the Big 10.
Man, put the ball down. Put the ball down. I'm sorry. I'm just one of these guys. I don't care about preseason polls. I have long stated that there should be no preseason polls. Polls should not come out till week 4, in my opinion, because before then you're reaching and guessing. It's like that old commercial for the dog food. You're wishing and hoping and wishing, because you don't know what these teams are going to be. You're saying to yourself, based off last year, this team should be this or that in the third, but you don't know who got worse, which players didn't develop, which schemes are going to get very stale because they run the same gimmicks, the same tricks. There's only so many ways that you can run that wide receiver touch pass before teams start to figure you out if you're certain teams, and that's your bread and butter. So ultimately, I'm looking at this saying, disrespect the ACC all you want, disrespect the Big 12 all you want, disrespect the group of five, disrespect anybody you want. That's fine. At a certain point in time, you're going to have to put that ball down. Yeah. And big angry men are going to have to move other big angry men. And I don't think it's going to work out in the way that most people think it will, rather, in that the SEC will have all of these teams across the board. That it's like, hey, if the playoff was just the best 12, it'd be 8 of our teams. And I guess for you scragglers, I strongly disagree.
I mean, let's talk about why preseason polls actually exist. I mean, it's to sell newspapers. I don't know if anyone actually buys. I don't know if anyone actually buys physical magazines and newspapers, but they exist for that reason. They exist for people to click on websites. They also exist to create conversation, right? I mean, look, we're doing it right now. Like, we're falling into this trap that the coaches poll came out and we're talking about it. But I do think it's a disservice. Like, preseason rankings are not only a bit pointless outside of being fun to talk about, but it's kind of a disservice because they can cause, voters for polls that actually matter. I mean, the coaches poll doesn't matter as much as the AP poll, and obviously the college football playoff poll matters more than all of them at the end, but it causes us all to form preseason opinions that may not be based on reality, and it may make teams who are outside of that, even if they win all their games, it may give them a tougher time of getting into the polls that matter.
But Donno, it just means more in the SEC. We learned that last year. The SEC dominated the ACC. Didn't they? What was their record against the ACC? Wasn't it like 11-0 or something like that? Wasn't that what it was?
Not maybe in another universe.
Oh, they had a losing record against the ACC last year, you say. Oh, okay. That's very interesting. 7, I think. It's because, the perception part of this thing shouldn't matter because, it shouldn't. It objectively shouldn't. We should be smart enough as adults to watch the games and form our own opinions. We should be smart enough to say, and I'll give you an example of how perception ruins some of these things, right? We talk about, Florida State last year after Jordan Travis went down, they barely beat a bad Florida team. They barely beat Louisville. Louisville was one of the top teams in the nation all year. They were never outside the top 20 past, I want to say, like week 5 or 6. Beating that team in the ACC championship, say what you want about Jack Plummer. I didn't believe in him either. I didn't think it was very good either. That is still one of the better teams in the nation, let alone the conference. But barely beating them was bad, right? And yet somehow Alabama barely beating Auburn, who just got the wheels whooped off them in Jordan-Hare by the New Mexico State Aggies. Let me tell you something.
And Auburn almost lost to Cal last year.
And that's my point. I'm talking about this from the standpoint of that almost win by Bama had their, I believe Milrow was walking around the field talking about, give me that MF and Heisman. Brother, you were benched earlier this year. What Heisman? But that's the thing. These SEC folks get it in their head that a certain reality exists where he was a Heisman guy. It's in his head, so it exists in a way. It doesn't. It doesn't work like that, and it shouldn't work like that. And that's why I challenge all of the members of the media. I challenge all of the people who do what we do to take your job serious. Watch the games, watch the film, because you do not come away with, this is one of the best teams in the nation despite them losing 3 to 4 games. Based on what? This is one of the best teams in the nation besides them losing 2 or 3 games. Based on what? Is it based on recruiting stars? Because if that's the point, let's just cut the games all together and let's just have the Under Armour All-American game transition directly into the college football playoff. Hey, whichever team gets the most guys from Under Armour and Armour All-American, y'all go ahead. Y'all go, hey, do your thing, you know.
Or even better, let's just simulate all the games on the new EA Sports video game. We'll just simulate the whole thing.
There you go. And you know what? That's worked out so well in the past because Texas A&M's recruiting classes have led to so much success down there in Aggie land. Yeah. And, you know, we don't even got to leave the ACC. With all due respect, Donno, I hate to do it. Miami's success in recruiting has led to championship after championship because they've consistently been – I mean, Donno, it can't be argued. Consistently, Miami's been one of the best recruiting teams in the ACC by class. And what is there to show for it?
Off-season champs.
So I think at some point in time, you've got to put that ball down. You've got to kick that ball off. And like I said, big angry men got to move some other big angry men. And that's how this thing should be decided out. But I think that it's ridiculous that the perception is in that way. And this is what you and me were talking about with Sankey needs, or not Sankey. Phillips needs to be more of a showman. He needs to be more of that braggadocious. This is what we're doing kind of guy. We've got the toughest strength of schedule out of all the Power 5 or Power 4 conferences. Nobody's coming like we're coming out of conference. We want the best because we are the best. That needs to be talked about more widely so that way the perception stops being different from reality, a lot like with the money where people think the Big 12 is making more and they're more stable than the ACC, when in all reality they aren't.
Speaking of perception, I think we're going to find out this year if East Coast bias is a real thing. Because a lot of us over here on the Atlantic coast, I mean, Kenton's in Raleigh, I'm down in Miami. A lot of us over here on the East Coast, we may not stay up for Pac-12 after dark every single Saturday, right? And so we're going to, and by the way, I can't wait to bring this man on because this X post has become a thing of legend here on Locked On ACC. You know, the swag coming out of Cal Berkeley. Lawrence Ross says, I've watched every ACC team and not one, including FSU, scares me as a Cal fan. It feels like a league of Arizona and Arizona States. So we're going to talk about this post with the man himself. You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. And the man is nice enough to join us now. We have him with us, Lawrence Ross, who he's and Lawrence, by the way, your X post, it inadvertently kind of bullied me into raising Cal up a little bit on my rankings because
see, that's what our influence is. We're brand new. You didn't know, now you know. That's the biggest thing about being going to Berkeley.
All right, so tell me, Lawrence. First of all, before we talk about Cal, because I do want to get your insight, because admittedly, like Kenton and I, we host Locked On ACC, but Cal has not been a part of this conference, so we are very uneducated on Cal, on Stanford. I know a little bit about SMU because half of their players are former Miami players, but with Cal, I know a little bit less. Let's start with the rest of the conference. Like when you talked about examining, a bunch of Arizona and Arizona States, why is it that teams like Florida State, Clemson, Miami, NC State don't really concern you?
So I think when you look at it, you have to look at it from like a Pac-12 perspective. When I said Arizona and Arizona State, folks jumped on and said, oh, this is your record against Arizona and Arizona State. That wasn't the point. You didn't have to remind me about the Hill Mary horror that I watched under the Sonny Dykes era or any of, for example, even going way back where it was Deshaun Jackson stepping out at Arizona, like right before he scored a touchdown, but prevented us from going to the Rose Bowl. But the Pac-12 and the ACC are slightly different. What I meant about Arizona and Arizona State are kind of like the schools that are typically 5-7, 7-5, with a sometime 8 game every so like 4th year of a new coach coming in, 8th or 9th game, and then they go back to a 5-7, 7-5. And so when I was looking at it, the reason why I was saying it was different than for example for Cal is that Cal played a 9-game schedule. And not only did we play a 9-game schedule, we always had to play USC and UCLA. So if you notice, if you think about it, just objectively, you didn't pay attention to Cal, right? But have you noticed all the NFL players that Cal produces, right? Yes. we have a ton of players, and you go, well, wait a second, you got Keenan Allen, you got Jared Goffs, you got Aaron Rodgers before, Marshawn's, and you think to yourself, well, why wasn't Cal like up there? Well, it's because in essence, what we actually had to do was play 2 schools every single year that always out-recruited us. And then if you tie that in with kind of how Cal's administration was, which was more of a, hey, it's all great, it's all fine. If we win, great. If we lose, it doesn't really move the needle. Well, then Cal was always basically in that mid 5-7, 7-5 era. Remember, we also were in the North. So we also have to play Oregon and then Washington every single year. And that is just throwing out the regular kind of like Utahs and Oregon States when they're up. So one of the problems was when I looked at like the ACC, I wasn't denigrating the fact that FSU is really great, but I was looking at it from a standpoint, okay, the 13-1 FSU, yes, horrifically better than Cal. But then I started thinking, well, how many of them are back? I just didn't see a whole bunch of them back. Where it would be a little bit like me looking at Washington. If the Pac-12 was still going, I would say, yeah, Washington killed us. Penix killed us, but they don't have anybody coming back. So in terms of being scared, no, FSU is always going to have a talent. Cal is always going to have a talent deficit to FSU. But is it the same talent deficit that, say, for example, when Cal would always play Oregon? Not really. Clemson, I think the team that Cal traditionally loses to, and Kenton, you're gonna like this, North Carolina States of the world. I promise you, I walked on the Cal's campus 40 years ago. I know I look young, but 40 years ago in 1984, Cal, out of for example, the 3 big schools that we have to play, Auburn, Florida State, and Miami, we're gonna win one of them. I couldn't tell you which one. The reasons for them could be a myriad. Auburn, because we should have beat them last year. Yeah. Florida State, because it's the first ACC game, so we're going to be heck of hype. Or Miami, because we got to bye right before we play Miami. And Miami, probably in terms of the talent and Cristobal, because Wilcox played Cristobal when he was at Oregon and did what Wilcox does, squeezed them to death, right? I think it was like 14-10 or something like that. So Cal will win those games and then lose the Pitt, or lose to North Carolina. And that's what life is like as a Cal fan. But you also have to recognize that Cal is really an 8-win team. If you could not have actually staged something in terms of like Cal beating USC by like 14 in the 4th quarter, and then I think we fumbled like 3 times and still were in the game. And then for Auburn, that was just a case of our current quarterback was nowhere to be seen. Sam Jackson is now at Auburn as a wide receiver. Ben Finley, I think, is at Akron. Before he was at your boys, North Carolina State.
Yeah, he beat USC, so he's NC State legend, little Ben Finley.
NC State legend, but he is not remembered at Cal. So one of the things was that it took a long time. We have a 3rd-string quarterback who's out there. Now, why are we so hyped, right? First of all, we're hyped about because apparently once we were like out there in the wilderness, we figured out that most people's perception of Cal football includes hippies, the Grateful Dead, liberal politics, and a bunch of other things that had nothing to do with Cal football.
It's a nerd school. It's a nerd school for sure.
Yeah, I mean, but even that, they just basically they'll show the Cal have fans, and they show an hour before the kickoff as being Cal's fan. And it's the funny part is that we know this, and then we also know how Cal actually reacts. And if you think about this is not a conference game this year, okay? This is basically a glorified out-of-conference schedule. Conference games, for example, in the Pac-12 are kids who played each other since Pop Warner, right? Yeah. They played in the same high school. They played in Pop Warner. They know each other. Even when they get on different schools, they know these kids, right? They know if that kid across the street, across from me, no matter how well they've improved, they know them for a long period of time. Cal actually happens to do pretty damn well out of conference, including Wilcox. I think Wilcox is like 15-5-ish around there. And the Auburn game is like the first game in 10 years where we didn't win. The initial game. I think we beat home and away. We beat North Carolina home and away. Ole Miss home and away. Texas home and away. We've had a pretty good schedule, but you guys didn't see it. One of the things that we're just like amazed at the ACC network having done the deepest dive on Cal in a decade. Like I can see Cal games in the Pacific on the Pac-12 network because it didn't play on the Spectrum, on one of the cable networks. So, but there's the most critical part of this about Cal, and this has nothing to do with the field. When Cal was basically, set adrift with Stanford, that was the first time Cal had an existential threat to football since the 1950s. And, you look at Cal and you think Cal, UCLA, the same system. Why does one emphasize football? Not as good. And why does the other one not? It's because Cal, Stanford, Cal, UCLA, USC back in the 50s got caught up in a big, gigantic, like pay-for-play scandal. And Cal basically decided, an administration, we're never going to be in that position again. We're never going to emphasize football again. Well, the existential threat was you have no conference. So now you have to actually emphasize football. And the way you can tell is based upon Cal brought in like 54 transfer portal. That never occurred. Usually the administration would have this or that to say that they couldn't be, come to Cal or whatever. Cal has to be good at football. Cal has to be football. So now it actually matches kind of what other people don't know, and you're going to soon find out, is that they're going to basically stockpile and have a new beginning in the ACC versus what we were in the Pac-12. And in the Pac-12 is just very difficult. I mean, I think if you're going to say what we're going to be in the ACC, the closest I would say in terms of kind of like what I think Wilcox would want would be Utah. Tough as hell on defense, because last year I said it was 8-game season. It's the only season that is uncharacteristically Wilcox, meaning that the defense didn't play well. The defense usually for Cal is usually like, the back end is back in a couple of years, few years back, there was the Takers. A lot of them are NFL. I think Cam Bynum is in the NFL, a bunch of them. And they really pride themselves on not really D-line play, but linebacker play and in the defensive backfield to stop Pac-12, what's called. But we were playing, we played DJ, Caleb, Penix, Bo Nix, and that's just the guys who were like in the middle of our schedule. I don't know every ACC team. I can't tell you. I know some of them in terms of like the guy who's coming to NC State, Graham is it.
You're thinking of Grayson McCall.
Yeah. So I've followed him for a while because he had been rumored to come to Cal, like was on a list for a period of time. And I'm not trying to denigrate the ACC. I'm just trying to say, for example, the 9-game schedule, this is how perception can change. Like we were talking about rankings. The 9-game schedule gives an automatic 50% one team, another loss in the Pac-12 versus the ACC, right? So ACC, I think, for example, if I just remember the standings, it's like ACC had like 6 or so teams that had 8 or more wins out of a 14, 15 team league. I can't remember. 14 team league?
Yeah. 14. It was 14. Yeah.
The Pac-12 had like 7 teams with 8 wins in a 9-game series. So if I'm looking at it from a Cal perspective, I got an extra win, okay, somewhere in there. Whether it's non-conference or, ACC, I could expect. I think, to me, Cal's floor is a 6 win, and I think the ceiling, depending on travel, which is we can't. That's a variable no one really knows until we do it. Is a 8 to 9 win, and that would mean obviously beating one of the 3, Miami, Florida State, and or Auburn. and then beating somebody who we probably shouldn't beat. And the scary, I'm looking at the schedule. The scary ones to me are North Carolina State, because that's the team that we typically lose to, and Wake Forest, because it's a Friday game. And that Friday game is, going to be hell on the players to, you play the game before, you got a short week, you got to fly out. I think that might have a chance to be kind of like the worst scenario for Cal. But other than that, no. I mean, I didn't see anything. I mean, we don't play Clemson, so I'm not saying anything. If we played Clemson, I would be like, okay, Clemson and FSU. But but everybody else, I mean, am I wrong about Boston College? Are they not a 5-7, 7-5 type of team?
They should. That would probably be their ceiling. Would be.
I was about to say 7-5 would be nice for them. I'd be geeked up out their minds.
Virginia. I mean, and I don't mean to throw shade at Miami.
Hey, listen, we
Miami's
don't
like 7-6, 5-7, 7-6. I mean, it has a great brand, but I mean, and honestly, when you just look at what the you are, what your record is, if I got to own a 6-7 Cal, Miami got to own a 7-6 record. That's kind of other than your. I still scratch my head at your Georgia Tech. I don't.
I try to forget it. I do it. Amnesia would have come in very handy that night.
The funny part is that that's not the first time that happened for Cristobal.
He lost that game in the exact same way in the
against Stanford. Wait
a second. Was it Stanford or Oregon State? I think
it was Stanford.
It was Stanford. Yeah.
And that was one I watched, and it was like 50 seconds left, and they ran the ball. And my buddy, my frat brother. And by the way, Keith, hey man, I have much respect for you, even as a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. I'm the author of the Divine Nine: History of African American Fraternities and Sororities. So, I love everybody, but you're wrong.
Well, and also I wanted to get like I originally when I became aware of Lawrence, it was for the tweet, but then I realized Lawrence Ross is an author. Tell us about your work.
So I am the author of the book called The Divine Nine: History of African American Fraternities and Sororities, which is the fraternities that Kenton and I belong to.
Oh,
and I saw your canes in the background. Literally, when somebody sent me over here, I looked at it. You moved your head. I was like, wait a second.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so I've had the fortune of lecturing at college campuses around the country, including everywhere in the ACC. I've been to Clemson like multiple times, but never been to North Carolina State. Been to Miami, Florida State, all the rest of the schools. But of anything in the world I love to talk about in particular is college football and in particular Cal football, because it's one of the things where people in the Bay Area really love Cal football. A lot of it in terms of how people's perception is that the Pac-12 was so badly run. I mean, it's just so badly run. And it was kind of almost an eternal war between the academic presidents who were really just concerned about the prestige and the academics versus the reality of what was happening in football, right? And so it became very difficult to tell the Pac-12 things like, for example, every time you have Cal for a night game, you destroy the tailgating tradition for regular games, right? So there's going to be a natural, fall off in terms of how people actually, whether or not they support versus go to the game versus watching that beautiful 70, inch flat screen that they have in their house. And but I think this is a chance for Cal to kind of recenter themselves. And I think the reason why Wilcox has been there for so long is that I think Cal realized that we couldn't, the whole, ditching coaches every 4 years wasn't really working. And I think it's more of the nature that Wilcox understands now what he has to do. And I think last year was kind of a first year experiment. This year, I think, is where it all comes together for him.
Well, I'll tell you this much. That I believe in Jay Knott. I believe in that secondary and all that. I struggle with big guys who can't stop the run. That's why I'm hesitant to pick Virginia Tech to win the conference. And Cal has a very similar problem over there. I love that defense, but your big guys concern me a little bit.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And I mean, it reminds me of like way back, okay, when USC was running everything in the early 2000s. and I can't remember the linebacker from USC, but in the national championship game, what his taunt was, all you big mugs can't stop all us little mugs, right? In order to get to the quarterback. And every time, it's like a concern. It's a general concern. I remember when we played Texas. I remember when we played Ole Miss. The concern was like, wait a second. That's when Ole Miss had DK Metcalf, right? Yeah. We were sitting and Shea, the quarterback, not Shea Carpenter, but I can't remember.
Shea Patterson,
right? And we were like, oh, well, Jesus, there's no way in the world our D line is going to be able to hold up to this, right? Mm-hmm. And funny enough, the Pac-12 had actually started getting bigger on the lines. Mm-hmm. And also what happened, so Oregon kind of has been like when for Dan Lanning, when he basically started bringing Cristobal started.
Yeah, Cristobal started,
like bringing SD-ness to the recruiting, and everybody else started getting bigger. Cal basically started getting other D linemen from other Big Ten schools. Or SEC schools to kind of pack it in. You can't find it in California. You're just not going to find big Ohio or, Alabama or Texas linemen in California. You're just not. But here's the problem. Here's the thing. Now that we can recruit on the East Coast, where we've recruited sometimes like New Jersey, we would recruit out there, you're going to start seeing that. And I think Wilcox's willingness to – let me give you the other things in terms of if you want to say Cal's like advantages that people don't know about. Mm-hmm. Cal's running back room goes beyond odd. You got Callaway, who came in for Old Dominion, who, the dude, I know it's just Marshall, but the dude ran for like 200 yards on like 5 plays, right? But he is no joke. Byron Cardwell, who used to be over at Oregon, he was hurt all last year, but he's, again, kind of like that running, kind of like spread offense type of running back. And we have a dude named Javian Thomas, the Jet, who's he was a freshman last year. He's absolutely fast as hell. Wilcox has absolutely increased the speed and depth for Cal. We have one of the most, I think, most people coming back, I think 7 on the offense and 6 on the defensive side. And some of them are going to start because what was brought in, and they were good. I'm not talking about they were okay, easy replacement. No, they were bringing we brought in Dykes from Maryland, who's for a tight end, and our tight end was I think second or third team Pac-12. I don't think our second or third team Pac-12 guy is actually going to start at tight end, but our depth level has definitely increased. The other thing I look for is what's your experience in the back? Can you stop? Can you stop opposing receivers? Everybody in Cal's back end is a 5th or 6th year.
Oh, and that's great.
Yeah, it's nothing but so you're not getting a whole bunch of folks who are just finding their way through. So
yeah, that experience is definitely going to be crucial in terms of dealing with all the complexity that comes with travel and all that for sure.
Right. How many games do you guys think Cal's going to win?
I say 6. I give him
6. I think I was going to say 6, but I think Lawrence talked me into 7 or maybe 12.
That's how we get you because we're going to disappoint you at some point in time. So.
As long as Miami's not one of those, but I am nervous about the road trip, Lawrence, and obviously Cal's going to experience it going in the other direction, but. Right. Miami hasn't gone that far west in 24 years. The last time they went out to the West Coast for a regular season game was actually against Washington in 2000, and that was the year where had they won that Washington game, they would have been in the national championship game.
Right.
A loss to Washington kept them out of it. So I know it's no picnic for a college team to go out there.
And I'm gonna say this. Say this. You talked about NC State being the team that Cal normally loses to. Yeah. NC State loves to step on that rake and smack ourselves in the face with a team.
Yeah,
that we look at on paper and you say NC State's the better team here. You just came off beating Miami, or you just came off beating Florida State. You just came off beating Clemson. You should win this game, and all of a sudden we find a way. So I'm gonna give you your respect. That game is my trap game for the year. I'm very serious. That Cal game, going to Cal, that's my trap game for the year for NC State.
I have 3 words for you: Cheez-It Bowl. Okay, so Cal can do those things at the exact same time, but. Really, the season will turn for Cal in the first 4 games. It will how will Cal go through those first 4 games? If we go 3-1, and because 5 out of the last 8 games are at home, so if we go 3-1, that's where everybody will start looking up. One last thing, I know you got to wrap. I am really big on rankings reform because the thing that it does, it sets up non-brand schools, non-big brand schools, to be further away, even if they're really good. And when they lose, their losses mean more than the bigger brand schools. Meaning that a loss from, if you're number 3 and you go down to number 12, you still have the full season to get back in the top 12. If you start outside of it, well, then you may get to number 18, but then start hitting some of your harder in-conference games. You lose, and then you get kicked out of the rankings. We've got to reform that if we're going to reform, the college football playoff.
Well, we appreciate Lawrence's time, and of course, I always appreciate Kenton, and I appreciate everyone who takes time to watch and listen to Locked On ACC. Get us for free: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey app, YouTube, wherever you get your pods. Awesome job, and it's great meeting Lawrence, Ross. We'll have to, every big game Cal wins. We'll have to bring Lawrence back.
In the words of the former governor of California, I'll be back.
We will talk.
Y'all got to learn this one thing. Go Bears. Yeah. All right.
All right.
We'll talk to everyone next time on another episode of Locked On ACC. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.